Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You stand in the Capitol Square, staring up at those massive screens. They show everything. Mutts tearing through the fog, a girl in flames spinning for the cameras. But here's the real question. What is the one thing those screens are never allowed to show? Not a mutation, not a glitch. A loss. Not your loss. The Capitol's. On paper, Panem is drowning in rules. The Treaty of Treason, the annual reapings, the age limits, the arena regulations. At face value, it feels airtight, this whole system where every tribute, every district, every victor has a place. But there was one rule that never made it into any document. And that part matters, because even President Snow treated it as sacred. The Capitol can never be seen losing control on live television. You're told the big rule of the games is simple. No two victors from the same district. One child crawls out. 23 go home in a box. We all remember Katniss and Peter breaking that rule with a handful of nightlock. So it's easy to think that's the moment the system cracks, right? But why did that single act of defiance hit so hard? Why did Snow execute Seneca Crane over a technicality? Why does the Capitol panic over berries more than over bodies? Because the one victor rule is just a safety rail. It exists to protect the deeper rule. The games must always end with the Capitol in absolute control of the story. There is a lot to uncover here. The dark days, the failed rebellion, the Treaty of Treason. All of that sets up a world where the Capitol can burn a district to ash, poison rivals in a rose garden, erase District 13 from the map, and then turn around and broadcast a glossy recap telling you it was mercy. This is where we talk about the relationship between power and television in Panem. The games are not just punishment, they're a live demonstration that the Capitol decides who lives, who dies, and even what those deaths mean. The reason they never show Capitol casualties, never air footage of peacekeepers running, never acknowledge a rebel victory in real time, is because the second the audience sees the Capitol bleed, the promise of its infallibility breaks. So what happens when the cameras catch the Capitol slipping? When two tributes threaten to die together rather than give them a clean ending? When District 13 hijacks the signal and drops Katniss's propose right into Capitol living rooms? When Snow is forced to televise the bombing of his own children in the guise of rebel cruelty? Each of those moments is a stress test of that hidden rule. And once you notice it, you start to wonder, were the games ever about the tributes at all? Or were they always about protecting the illusion that the Capitol could never, ever lose? From ashes to airwaves. Why the games had to be unbeatable? Because to understand that illusion, you have to go back to the last time the Capitol actually looked like it might lose. The dark days. This is where we talk about real war, not curated war. Back then, The districts didn't just grumble and trade snarky comments about the capital on the black market. They took up weapons. They bombed supply lines. District 13 didn't just threaten nuclear retaliation. For a while, the districts almost broke the capital's grip on Panem. People saw capital hovercraft shot out of the sky. They saw peacekeepers retreat. That part matters because it's the last public memory of the capital struggling, bleeding, and scrambling to hold power. And then, suddenly, that entire era gets sealed under one tidy phrase: the Treaty of Treason. At face value, it's sold as a contract. You rebel, you get the games. Every year, your children pay the price. Simple, brutal, moral of the story stuff. But here's the real question. If the capital just wanted punishment, why turn it into a national event? Why not execute rebels quietly, off-screen, the way most dictatorships actually prefer to do it? The reason is baked right into the format. The games aren't only a sentence, they're a schedule. Annual, predictable, televised. The Treaty of Treason doesn't just outlaw rebellion, it guarantees a permanent programming block where the capital gets to broadcast its own infallibility. We're going to cover the victor's village later, but already you can see the pattern. The punishment is also the commercial. Every arena becomes a live advertisement for capital control. Back then, power was decided with guns and bombs. Whoever held the most weapons, the most soldiers, the most nukes, won. Now, power is decided with cameras and editing bays. You don't need to win every battle on the ground if you can win every frame on the screen. Why risk a messy street execution when you can stage a perfectly lit, slow-motion death in an arena, complete with commentary explaining why you're right? But that raises even more questions. Why make the games live at all? Why risk unscripted moments, desperate alliances, tributes screaming the capital's name in hatred? Why not pre-record everything and cut out the parts where the tributes outsmart the arena? The answer is uncomfortable. The capital needs the districts to believe the show is real, spontaneous, undeniable. If the games feel fake, the threat feels fake. If the threat feels fake, the fear evaporates. So the capital walks a tightrope. The audience must see danger, but never see the capital in danger. They can watch a tribute stab a career, but not a tribute outwit the system itself. The games can be chaotic, but never out of control. And that's the real function of this ritual. It's not just about killing children. It's about never letting anyone in Panem witness a single moment where the capital looks weak, wrong, or off balance. That invisible rule is what we're going to track as it quietly shapes every arena, every victor, and eventually every crack in Snow's regime. The one thing the capital could never say out loud. So here's the part the capital would never air as a segment on Caesar Flickerman's show. There was one rule behind every smiling host, every glitter cannon, every recap of the games. On camera, the capital can never lose and can never be wrong. That's it. That's the rule even Snow is afraid to break. Because the moment the audience sees the capital lose, the whole performance stops being inevitable and starts being negotiable. But what does never lose actually mean in a world where children are literally dying on live TV? It means you never see a rebel victory. You never see a peacekeeper outsmarted without some immediate capital revenge to reassert dominance. You never see a narrative where the district kid looks justified and the capital looks like the villain. Anytime that dynamic even starts to appear, the broadcast cuts away, the audio drops, or the commentary rewrites what you just watched. At face value, the games promise fairness, order, and tradition. 2 tributes, 1 victor, may the odds be ever in your favor. It sounds almost neutral, almost mathematical. But here's the real question. Why would a regime that bombs District 12 suddenly care about fairness in an arena? They don't. The rules exist only as long as they protect the image of capital infallibility. This is where we talk about that word, infallibility. The capital survives by projecting that it is inevitable, untouchable, morally justified. The Treaty of Treason isn't just a punishment, it's a script. It says, the districts were wrong, the capital was right, and history will never argue with that. That part matters, because once you admit you are wrong once, people start asking when you'll be wrong again, and again, and again. So the games become a yearly ritual to rehearse the same answer. The capital is never wrong. When Rue dies, the broadcast can show grief, but not organized anger. When a district sends gifts, it's framed as heartwarming generosity, not strategic resistance. The relationship between what actually happens in the arena and what you're allowed to see is the real battlefield. And when reality threatens that illusion, the rules change. Mid-broadcast. The 74th games literally rewrite themselves to allow 2 victors from the same district, not because the capital suddenly discovered compassion, but because Seneca Crane is trying to rescue the image of control after Katniss and Peter's suicidal berries stunt corners him. Better to bend the rules than let the audience watch the capital lose a power struggle to a girl with a handful of nightlock. There is a lot to uncover here. From Seneca's creative decision that costs him his life, to Snow's propaganda war with District 13, where Katniss's hacked propo broadcasts finally show Panem a capital that bleeds. We're going to cover every moment this unspoken rule is tested, bent, and, eventually, shattered on screen. Tonight's broadcast, what we're really watching for. So tonight's broadcast inside our broadcast needs a roadmap, because if we're going to track the one rule the capital was afraid to break, we have to watch the games the way Snow did. As television first, blood sports second. Here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going back to the dark days, the Treaty of Treason, and those early clumsy Hunger Games where the capital is still figuring out what story it's even telling. You think of those grainy, brutal first broadcasts where the message is just punishment and fear. So, why the change? Why evolve from public executions with a school board into a polished, recurring reality show with stylists' interviews and star victors? At face value, the answer is because spectacle keeps the districts in line. But here's the real question. What did the capital learn very early on about the danger of showing too much? This is where we talk about how the game shifted from raw footage to curated narrative, why commentators explain away anything that looks rebellious, and why the cameras always cut away at the exact moment a capital weakness might slip through. Second, we break down the mechanics of that unspoken rule, the rule that the capital can never be seen losing control. Not in the arena, not on Caesar's stage, not even in Snow's own roses and champagne broadcasts. We're going to cover how censorship, editing, and mid-game rule changes all exist to protect that illusion. Why does the announcer instantly reframe a tribute's defiance as romantic? Why does a mutt attack get replayed in slow motion, but a malfunctioning force field or a glitching hovercraft feed just? Then we move into case studies, the moments where the rule almost snaps. The berries, obviously, where Seneca's desperate decision to allow two victors from the same district keeps the capital from airing its own humiliation live. The Quarter Quell twist, where reaping existing victors exposes the lie that winning ever meant safety and forces the capital to double down on propaganda. District 13's hacked Propo War, where Katniss's fire is catching spots finally show capital casualties and smoking ruins on screens that were only supposed to display district deaths. And the bombing of capital children, when Snow and Coin both gamble on what Panem will be allowed to see and who will be blamed. After that, we zoom out to a meta layer, because the books and the movies are also broadcasts. There is a lot to uncover here in how Suzanne Collins chooses what you're allowed to witness on the page versus what the films highlight or soften on screen. That part matters because it mirrors the capital's own control issues, whose suffering is centered, whose is cropped out, and how much hope the audience is permitted to feel. And finally, we end with a speculative segment. What if this rule had broken earlier? What if a district hacked the games during, say, the 10th Hunger Games? Or if rebels had fully seized the airwaves during Katniss's first victory tour? We're going to use in-universe tech, timelines, and lore to imagine alternate broadcasts that still feel like Panem, and ask one last question. If the capital ever truly lost control of the narrative, would the game survive even one more year? Welcome to the broadcast, why this channel lives in Panem's head. And if you're new to this channel, this is where we talk about what happens when that control finally slips. We don't just rewatch the Hunger Games and point at cool arena traps. We ask why those traps are there, why the cameras cut when they do, and why a single handful of berries could scare a government that bombs entire districts without blinking. At face value, Panem is just dystopian spectacle. But here's the real question. What invisible rules make that spectacle work in the first place? Around here, we treat the games as a full media ecosystem. Politics, world building, the psychology of a victor who has to smile on command, the quiet rules that decide which deaths get replayed in slow motion and which vanish between commercial breaks. There is a lot to uncover here. If you've ever paused a scene to stare at Snow's roses in the background and thought, okay, but what message is he sending right now? You're in the right district. We position this channel as the anti-capital broadcast. The capital edits the story to keep you numb. We rewind the tapes and pause on the uncomfortable frames. They show you Katniss twirling in a burning dress. We freeze on Cinna's face right before the peacekeepers drag him away. They replay Caesar Flickerman's laughter. We listen to the silence after the cannon fires. That part matters because the capital's greatest weapon is not the arena, it's the edit. The cutaway, the decision to never let you see the moment when a peacekeeper hesitates or when a crowd doesn't cheer on cue. So what we're going to cover on this channel are the tiny fractures in that perfect image. The treaty clauses, the victory tour speeches, the background extras. Because those are the places where you can see the real relationship between the capital and the districts. And this episode, this isn't just a lore recap about some abstract rule of narrative control. This is the single broadcasting rule that explains everything from Katniss's pre-games interviews to Snow's obsession with those pristine white roses. Why does he keep putting a symbol of decay masked as beauty on camera next to the girl who keeps refusing to play along? Why does the capital double down on glitter every time the districts get closer to open rebellion? If you enjoy this kind of deep dive into fictional regimes, their treaties, their TV schedules, their carefully staged promises of hope, consider sticking around, subscribing or joining the channel so you don't miss the next breakdown. We're building an archive of broadcasts the Capitol would absolutely censor. Alright, let's roll the tape back to the moment the Capitol realized the games couldn't just be executions on live TV anymore. They had to become a story, a promise, and the one rule they could never afford to break. From the 10th games to Snow's screens, building a regime that never lose. We cut back in right after the 10th Hunger Games, and the first thing you notice is that the arena doesn't even feel finished. It's a bombed-out stadium, half collapsed, no holograms, no fireballs, no parade of designer costumes. The Capitol is forcing districts to watch, but no one is staying tuned in by choice. Back then, the games are punishment on camera, nothing more. Ratings are terrible, sponsors barely exist, and even Capitol students treat the whole thing as a morbid school project. So here's the real question. How do you turn a live execution into something people actually want to watch every year? This is where we talk about Coriolanus Snow before the Roses, before the presidency, when he's just a hungry academy student trying not to lose his family apartment. In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, he's assigned as a mentor and suddenly sees the problem no one in power wants to admit. Fear alone isn't sticky. You can threaten districts into watching, sure, but you can't threaten Capitol citizens into caring. His answer is brutal and brilliant. You don't change the punishment, you change the frame. Snow leans into interviews, sponsor gifts, backstories. He realizes the games need characters, not just tributes. The moment Lucy Gray sings, the broadcast shifts from public execution to talent show with knives. At face value, it's just extra spectacle. But that part matters because it plants the seed of what the games will become, reality TV with a body count. Why does that work? For the Capitol, it adds glamour and distance. You're not watching a starving child die, you're watching your tribute in a gorgeous arena wearing couture. For the districts, it adds something even more dangerous. The faint promise that your kid might be special enough to win, to come home, to become a victor with a house and food and safety. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of function. The regime needs two audiences with opposite needs. Capitol viewers must feel entertained and superior. District viewers must feel just enough hope to keep participating in their own oppression. If no one ever wins, the games are a slaughter. If winning looks too honest, the system looks fragile. So Snow threads the needle, and here's where his real innovation shows up. It isn't just arena design. He understands that as long as the Capitol controls the story, it doesn't matter how ugly the footage is. You can edit around starvation. You can reframe murder as courage. You can drown screams under an anthem. The Treaty of Treason gives the legal reason for the games. Snow builds the emotional script that makes them feel inevitable, which leads to the one rule he quietly builds everything around. From the second the games become a show, the cameras can never show the Capitol losing control of its own story. No true glitches, no visible panic, no sense that the narrative could slip into rebel hands. So what happens when a girl with a handful of berries walks right up to that rule and almost snaps it in half on live television? Editing out the dark days. How the Capitol rewrote history on loop. Katniss almost breaks the rule in the present. But the Capitol already broke it in the past. Because before you can rig a live broadcast, you have to rig the reruns. And in Panem, the dark days are the ultimate rerun. You grow up hearing about them in school, in mandatory viewings, in every smug recap before the games. At face value, it sounds straightforward. The districts got greedy, they rebelled, they were crushed, and the merciful capital invented the games so everyone would remember their place. Clean, simple, suspiciously tidy. In capital classrooms, the Treaty of Treason is treated almost like sacred text. The maps show a neat ring of obedient districts around a shining center. The animation of the rebellion? It's basically a stylized montage, burning districts, anonymous silhouettes, then the capital's hovercrafts sweeping in as order is restored. The voiceover always lands on the same moral about district guilt and capital mercy, as if the whole war was a teachable moment rather than a near collapse of the regime. But here's the real question. What don't you see? You never see capital losses. No footage of capital citizens starving in the blackout. No images of bombed-out capital avenues or mass graves in the city that supposedly never bleeds. There is no admission that the rebellion almost worked. Even though the existence of the treaty, the peacekeepers, and the games screams that the capital was scared enough to redesign the entire relationship between center and district. That part matters because it tells you the edit is the point. History isn't a record, it's a highlight reel of capital victory. Every frame is chosen to sell one promise. The capital was always in control, and it always will be. If they can slice out their own fear from the past, what do you think they'll do to the present? This is where we talk about the template. Once you understand that, the way they talk about District 13 stops being a weird quirk and starts looking like policy. For decades, capital commentators refer to 13 as destroyed, a cautionary tale, a smoking crater on the map. Meanwhile, we know it's secretly thriving underground, running its own command center, its own broadcasts. The official story doesn't update, because admitting survival would mean admitting failure. The map is edited, so reality has to obey the map. And whenever there's unrest in a district, it's never an uprising on Capital TV. It's isolated violence, irrational anger, a few troublemakers who forgot the lessons of the dark days. Whole crowds get cut down, and all you see is a clipped, zoomed-in shot of a single agitator being dealt with. We're going to cover the open rebellions later, but the groundwork is here. If a protest can be framed as random chaos, the system never has to look guilty. So, if the capital can erase an entire district from the narrative and turn a near defeat into a morality play, what else can it cut out of the frame when the cameras start to show something dangerous? The games go prime time, turning executions into a shared ritual. So what happens when the thing you're cutting out of the frame isn't a single protest, but the games themselves starting to misbehave on camera? This is where we talk about the moment executions stop being local corrections and become a national ritual. Back in the earliest years, the games are closer to a mass public hanging with extra steps, crude arenas, minimal styling, grainy feeds if your district can even see them. The message is simple: the capital can kill your children. But here's the real question: why does the capital slowly pivot from that blunt terror to a polished themed spectacle with fire capes, interview couches, and a man whose entire job is to make you forget you're watching state-sanctioned murder? The answer is that a punishment can scare you once. A story can own you every year. So the arenas get clever. Forests that can catch fire on command. Clockwork islands, deserts with hidden force fields. Tributes get stylists who turn them into walking brands. At face value, that looks generous. The Capitol is celebrating the tributes. In reality, it's making sure you and every other viewer in Panem are emotionally invested enough to tune in, cry, gossip, and then accept the ending the Capitol has already chosen. And then there's Caesar Flickerman. Any victor will tell you the games don't start at the gong. They start on his couch. He turns trauma into talk show content, taking a terrified kid from some forgotten district and reframing them as comic relief, tragic hero, or romantic lead. That part matters because once he's given you a role, every horrible thing that happens to you in the arena can be spun as character development instead of evidence that the system is monstrous. Notice how shared the ritual becomes. Every year, every district and the Capitol sit down to watch the same story, same anthem, same countdown, same promise. The Capitol will win, the districts will lose, and one suitably camera-friendly victor will survive to endorse the whole process. You're not just watching a death match, you're participating in a national holiday where the relationship between ruler and ruled is resworn on live TV. Commentary is the glue. Caesar and Claudius never describe an event as needless cruelty or a glitch in the system. A mutt attack becomes heroic sacrifice. A brutal execution becomes justice. A starving child's death is framed as fate, bad luck, or their own district's failure. There is a lot to uncover here, but the key is that the games are never allowed to look unfair in a way that implicates the Capitol itself. And once the games are this central, the unspoken rule hardens. Because everyone is watching, the Capitol cannot afford a live moment that contradicts the narrative of control. Any hint of rebellion, any technical failure, any sign the arena isn't perfectly managed has to be cut away from, edited in replay, or retroactively explained as part of the plan. Remember how quickly the cameras pull off Katniss and Peter with the berries, and how fast Seneca disappears afterward? That's the rule enforcing itself. Here's the twist. The more the Capitol leans on spectacle, the more it depends on live unpredictability to keep people hooked. But live TV is messy. You can script interviews, you can't fully script a desperate tribute with nothing left to lose. So the tension builds. What happens the first time the games deliver not just a shocking moment, but an unscripted loss for the Capitol in front of the whole country? Cameras as weapons, the psychology behind the unspoken rule. So when the games finally hand the Capitol an unscripted loss, what actually happens on screen? This is where we talk about the real arena, not the forest, not the fire, the broadcast, because the games are a weaponized TV show. The tributes fight in the dirt, but the front line is your living room wall. Whoever controls the cameras controls what every district believes they just saw. And that part matters because Panem has already lived through one moment when the Capitol visibly lost. The dark days. Snow cannot afford a sequel. At face value, you're watching a live event. 24 kids, one arena, one winner. But here's the real question. How live is anything that passes through the Capitol's pipeline? The system is layered. First, you have raw feeds from countless arena cameras, hovercrafts, and hidden mics, all pouring into control rooms under the city. That chaos is instantly filtered by Gamemakers, who decide which angles are safe, which deaths are dramatic, and which glitches vanish forever. On top of that, there's live commentary. Caesar Flickerman isn't just a host. He's the emotional translator of the regime. If a tribute dies because a mutation malfunctioned, you'll hear about their heroic struggle, not the technical error that almost embarrassed the Capitol. The narrative is patched in real time. Cutaways to cheering Capitol crowds, to sponsors toasting, to Snow's approving nods. Those are there to remind you who's winning, no matter what's actually happening in the trees. And then comes the post-production phase. Recap segments, memorial montages, victory tours. We're going to cover how those recaps quietly rewrite the games you thought you watched into a clean story of inevitable Capitol dominance. Peacekeeper brutality that sparked an outburst in a district square? Cut. A tribute screaming that the games are wrong. Muted under swelling music. Any hint that the system is fragile is sanded down before it can turn into a question in someone's mind. Why is that so dangerous? Because in a dictatorship, the moment people see that the rulers can be wrong, or worse, can lose, the spell of inevitability breaks. The Treaty of Treason pretends the Capitol's power is destiny. The broadcasts have to make it feel the same way. If you notice a peacekeeper die on camera, you remember they're mortal. If you see a district protest hold for more than 3 seconds, you remember that resistance is possible. So the Capitol never shows its own casualties. You don't see the peacekeepers shot in District 8. You don't see the bodies after District 12 is bombed. You see smouldering ruins framed as necessary. Any district defiance is edited into a short, decisive lesson. Disorder flares, the Capitol crushes it. Order returns. The relationship between viewer and regime stays simple. They act, you watch. But here's the real question. What happens when something goes wrong that's too big to cut away from? When a tribute like Katniss forces the Capitol to either break its own rule or break the games? Why let them volunteer? The paradox at the heart of the games. So when something happens you can't cut away from, you hit the core paradox of the games. If the Capitol needs total control, why build in any cracks at all? Why let people volunteer? Why allow sponsors to send gifts? Or stylists to turn a tribute into a sensation? Why encourage you to root for an underdog, to believe that maybe your district's kid could pull off a miracle? At face value, that sounds dangerous. Wouldn't a truly safe version of the games be pure industrial-grade terror with no exits? Imagine that version for a second. No chariots, no interviews, no Sinner turning a girl from 12 into the girl on fire, no silver parachutes drifting down with medicine or bread, no arena cameras lingering on faces, no Victor's tour, no Victor's village waiting at the end. Just anonymous children dropped into some forest, dying off screen while the Capitol announces a name and moves on. That sounds harsher. But here's the real question. Is it actually safer for the regime? Because if your child is just meat for the machine, with zero chance to stand out, what do you cling to? You don't have a favorite. You don't have a narrative. You don't even have the cruel promise that if we win, our district eats. You only have the knowledge that the Capitol will take until someone stops it. And when people believe they have nothing left to lose, fear stops being a leash and starts being fuel. This is where we talk about hope. Snow spells it out to Seneca Crane in the film. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. There is a lot to uncover here, because that line is the operating manual for the entire game system. The Capitol doesn't just tolerate hope, it manufactures a very specific kind. Volunteers, sponsors, stylists, interviews, the promise of a house in the victor's village. Those are all calibrated doses of personal hope. My kid might be chosen as a career, my tribute might get a sponsor gift, our victor might win and bring home food, or at least a new roof over our heads. The relationship between district and capital shifts from how do we end this to how do we win this. That part matters because it explains the real unspoken rule. The rule isn't no hope. The rule is no hope that the capital can lose. You're allowed to hope your tribute survives. You are never allowed to hope the games stop existing. So every design choice serves that rule. The cameras linger on individual bravery, not on the system that requires it. The Tesserae twist, the career packs, the mentors, the victory tour, all of it keeps hope small, local, and competitive. District 4 hopes to beat District 2. District 12 is shocked to have any victor at all. No one is supposed to hope that Panem could function without the games. Which brings us back to Katniss and those berries, because in that moment, the hope on screen stops being personal and starts to look very, very systemic. And that's the one kind Snow cannot afford to broadcast. So what do you do as the capital when the only way to keep your rule is to break the games themselves? Hope on a leash. How the capital scripts every miracle. You start by tightening the leash on what hope is allowed to do. Because here's the real question. If the games are supposed to prove the capital can't be challenged, why do they keep giving us underdogs to cheer for? Why risk a Haymitch, a Katniss, a tribute from a starving district walking away with the crown? At face value, the answer is simple. It makes better TV. A career from District 1 winning every year is boring. A scrappy nobody from District 12 outsmarting the arena, that's a story. That part matters, because stories are how you sell the promise that the games are fair, that anyone can win if they're clever, brave, or tragic enough. So the capital doesn't just tolerate underdog narratives, it curates them. Look at District 12's record. Haymitch isn't framed as a glitch in the system. He's the charming drunk who outwitted a brutal arena with that force field trick. Caesar Flickerman laughs with him, not at the fact that the capital designed a horror show so broken a teenager had to break physics to survive. The relationship between victor and system is rewritten on camera. The games didn't fail, the victor triumphed. Then Katniss arrives, another 12 victor decades later. Is that evidence the games are slipping? On air, absolutely not. This is where we talk about spin. Caesar turns her into the girl on fire, the star-crossed lover, the reluctant hero whose defiance is really just passion, romance, humanity, anything except a political question. And when things get too risky, the rulebook itself bends. Sponsors, gifts, parachutes dropping at the perfect moment. These are presented as rewards for audience engagement. You were charming in your interview, so here's burn cream. You cried over your ally, so here's bread from a sympathetic district. We're going to cover it as generosity, not intervention. But the reality is brutal. The capital is live editing the games with every silver parachute, steering alliances, prolonging favorites, nudging the story away from open rebellion and back toward cathartic spectacle. Even Seneca's infamous rule tweak, 2 victors from the same district, gets sold as a romantic twist, a gift to Panem, when it's actually a desperate attempt to keep the ratings and the illusion of control. Here's the rule under all the rules. Hope is allowed only if it flows through the capital, They must be the source of mercy, the author of miracles, the matchmaker behind every on-screen kiss. What's never allowed is hope that bypasses them, embarrasses them, or proves they aren't necessary. Which is exactly why the Nightlock berries are so dangerous. For the first time, we watch hope weaponized against the Capitol in real time, without permission, without a sponsor, without a host to translate it into something cute. Two tributes from the same district decide they would rather end the games than let the Capitol win. And suddenly, to keep their rule, the Capitol has to break their own game. The question is, once you've done that on camera, how long can the illusion of invincibility really last? District 12 versus the career districts. Who the rule was built for. So when that illusion cracks on live TV, who feels it first? The starving coal miner in District 12, or the perfectly trained volunteer polishing a sword in District 2. This is where we talk about the spectrum Panem has been engineered into. On one end, you have districts where no one in their right mind volunteers. District 12 is the template here. People are too hungry, too busy surviving, and the games are a once-a-year horror that steals 2 kids and never gives them back. On the other end, you've got the career districts 1, 2, 4. Kids train for the arena the way you might train for a sport. Volunteering is not a sacrifice, it's a status move. At face value, that looks like 2 totally different relationships to the games. In District 12, the reaping is a funeral. In District 2, it's more of an audition. How does that unspoken rule of capital invincibility land in each place? And why was it basically tailor-made for the careers? In the career districts, the rule is a feature, not a bug. The games are a source of pride, proof that your district produces the best killers, the smartest strategists, the favorite toys of the Capitol. When the Capitol always wins on screen, that part matters because it feels aligned with your own superiority. Your tributes dominate the field, your victors come home crowned, and the broadcast confirms what you already believe. The system works, and you're on the winning team. So why would you question the rule? Why would you want to see the Capitol lose anything, ever, when their invincibility is the backdrop that makes your victory meaningful? The promise is clear. Serve well, win big, live rich. The careers are the perfect audience because the games don't just terrify them, they validate them. Now jump back to District 12. Same rule, completely different emotional weather. Here, the games are pure terror. The broadcast isn't about pride, it's about dread and morbid roll call. You watch to see if your neighbor's kid dies today or tomorrow, and yet, even here, the rule holds. Nobody in living memory has watched the Capitol actually lose on screen. No failed execution, no rebel victory, no admitted mistake. The message is, you can maybe win the arena. You will never win the story. Pattern interrupt. What about everyone in the middle we never really see? Districts 5, 6, 9, 10 don't have full-blown career culture, but they're not 12-level desperate either. You get hints. A few victors scattered through history, local legends about that one year someone from your district actually did it. The games feel just winnable enough to keep you watching, just hopeless enough that you don't imagine changing the rules themselves. And here's the catch. We only really see Panem through Katniss. Our sense of how this rule operates elsewhere is mostly inference. But the Capitol's messaging is too consistent, too polished for it not to be universal. Every district, from marble training centers to coal dust streets, is tuned to the same broadcast. The games may twist, but the capital never loses. So when two kids from the worst district on the spectrum force a different ending, who does that destabilize more? The people at the bottom, or the ones who thought they were safely on top? The arena as a rigged game show, when the rules are just another prop. So if the capital can never lose, how do you handle a story that keeps trying to slip out of your hands? You turn the entire arena into a rigged game show where even the rules are just set dressing. At face value, the Hunger Games are presented as rigid, almost sacred. One boy, one girl from each district, no tampering once the countdown ends. One victor, crowned by blood and merit. The Treaty of Treason makes it sound carved into stone. But here's the real question. If those rules are so holy, why do the game makers keep breaking them the second the narrative stops serving the capital? This is where we talk about the 74th Games, because there is a lot to uncover here. When Claudius Templesmith's voice booms through the arena, announcing a historic rule change, two tributes from the same district can win, you're told it's a gift, a romantic twist, a reward for star-crossed devotion. In reality, the ratings were slipping. Katniss and Peeta had accidentally created a story the capital didn't plan for, not just fear, but genuine hope in the districts. So the game makers do what any desperate producer would do. They pivot. Suddenly, the one victor rule, supposedly the core of the game's punishment, turns out to be negotiable. The real law isn't written in any anthem. The real law is the capital must look in control and preferably generous at all times. That part matters because it shows the hierarchy of rules. The written ones are props. The unwritten one is the stage itself. You see it in the smaller manipulations too. Mutations aren't just released. They're released at exactly the moment the tension dips. The fire that drives Katniss towards the careers, dialed up not for fairness, but for camera angles. Even the arena hazards, the drought, the feast, the sudden appearance of that final cornucopia of supplies, are less about survival logic and more about episode pacing. We're going to cover how sponsors work later, but notice this now. Even gifts are throttled. They don't just arrive when a sponsor pays, they arrive when the story needs a beat, when the capital wants to tease its audience with the promise of mercy. So what does that do to the relationship between the capital and the rules it claims to worship? It exposes that the games are never about justice, only about performance. The reason Snow is so calm about children dying, yet furious about a handful of berries, is that the berries threaten the only rule he actually cares about. Because when Katniss and Peeta reach the end and pull out the nightlock, they flip the game show on its host. They force the capital into a live, on-air dilemma. Either allow two victors and admit the rules were always flexible, or let both die and shatter the illusion of control and generosity in front of every district. Either choice breaks the unspoken rule in a different way, and that's the moment the games stop being safely scripted and start becoming dangerous. And the capital's reaction to that one unscripted beat, that's where everything really starts to crack. The nightlock checkmate, when live TV cornered President Snow. So this is where we talk about the one moment the games almost fail on camera. You're at the cornucopia, the mutts are dead, the cannon has gone quiet, and suddenly the rules snap back. The cheery announcement is gone. In its place, the original promise of the arena. Only one victor. Katniss and Peeta aren't told to go home. They're ordered to finish the ritual. At face value, it's just the game makers correcting a mistake. The two-victor twist was a stunt, now retracted. But here's the real question. What happens when your punishment ritual backs you into a corner where the only way to complete it is to broadcast two beloved teenagers murdering each other on live TV? Katniss does the math faster than anyone in the Capitol control room. If she kills Peter, she becomes the Capitol's perfect little victor, the face of a story they can still control. If he kills her, same thing. But if they both eat the Nightlock, then for the first time since the Treaty of Treason, the games produce no victor at all. That part matters because the whole relationship between capital and districts is built on that annual winner. One child survives. The district gets celebrations, food, a tiny injection of hope. The games hurt, but they also end. There is a conclusion, a name, a face to put on the capital's supposed generosity. No victor means the ritual fails in front of everyone. So the stakes of the berries aren't just 2 lives, they're the unspoken rule. The capital never loses the games. Ever. The arena can be brutal, unfair, even glitchy, but it cannot be outsmarted, especially not by a coal miner's daughter and the baker's son from the weakest district. Snow's options narrow to 2, and both are terrible. Option 1, let them die. You prove the written rule is sacred, but you also prove the games can be beaten by refusing to play. Every district sees that if tributes coordinate, they can deny the capital its ending. Imagine what District 11 does with that idea after Rue. Option 2, break your own rule on air. Reverse the announcement again. Declare 2 victors to stop the suicide. You preserve the illusion that the capital decided this outcome, that mercy is still a weapon only they can wield. The written rules bend. The unspoken rule of infallibility stays intact. Snow chooses option 2. He has to. We're going to cover later how Seneca Crane pays for that choice. But in the moment, the priority is simple. Protect the broadcast. Make it look intentional. Pretend the capital always meant to crown a star-crossed pair. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the damage is already done. Millions have just watched a tribute count down to double suicide and force the games to blink first. You can execute a head game maker. You can threaten a victor's family. You can script apologies and love stories. So how do you edit out the one thing the cameras already taught every district, that the capital can change its mind when you push hard enough? Rewriting the berries. How the capital tried to undo a live defeat. So, the rule has been exposed on live television. The games can flinch. The capital can back down. What do you do the morning after you accidentally teach every district that? You don't admit it. You rewrite it. At face value, the broadcast ending of the 74th Hunger Games is a love story. Caesar Flickerman is practically vibrating as he calls it an unprecedented romantic triumph. 2 star-crossed victors from the same district, saved by the capital's generosity. The announcers lean hard on that word. Mercy. Not, we were forced. Not, we panicked when the girl with the berries called our bluff. Mercy. It's spun as a last-minute gift, not a last-second surrender. That part matters because it's the first bandage over the wound in the unspoken rule. If the capital can convince you this was a special exception, a reward for passion, then the game's logic stays intact. You're not supposed to see a system crack. You're supposed to see a benevolent ruler indulging young love. But here's the real question. What does it look like inside Snow's mansion once the cameras cut? Behind the scenes, we're told Snow is furious, and not because Seneca Crane misread a subsection of the rulebook. There is a lot to uncover here about why Seneca actually dies. He didn't break a written statute. He endangered the unwritten one. By allowing the double victory to stand, he let every district watch the game's core promise wobble, the promise that the capital never loses, that the rules only ever move in one direction, against you. So Snow does two things at once. Publicly, he promotes Seneca's face on chocolate and fashion. Privately, he locks him in a room with a bowl of the same nightlock berries that almost humiliated the regime on air. It's not just an execution, it's narrative correction. The berries are reassigned. They don't belong to Katniss's defiance anymore. They belong to capital punishment. This is where we talk about Katniss's victory tour as damage control. On paper, a victor's tour is a victory lap. In reality, Katniss is dragged across Panem to sell a story she doesn't believe. Every speech, every appearance, she's coached to frame the berries as a love-struck impulse. She wasn't challenging the games. She was too overwhelmed by her relationship with Peter to think straight. The capital isn't beaten on camera. It's moved by romance. Why force that angle so hard? Because if her act is emotional, not political, then Snow can pretend the rule was never really bent. The game stays sacred. The capital stays in charge, except the districts don't buy it. On the ground, people saw the countdown, the threat, the hesitation. They saw a girl from District 12 hold the entire spectacle hostage with a handful of poison. Small uprisings start to flare during the tour, from the old man in District 11's salute to whispers in the crowds. The interpretation has already slipped. The berries mean the outcome isn't inevitable. So we're going to cover how this frantic propaganda blitz is really an attempt to rewind time. The unspoken law isn't fully broken yet, but everyone has seen it bend, and once you've seen that, what else might you start to question? The quarter quell trap, doubling down on a broken story. So if the berries bend the story, how does the capital try to snap it back? You don't just change the channel on a symbol that big. You rewrite the entire season. Enter the third quarter quell. At face value, the premise sounds official, even ancient. Every 25 years, there's a special games, predetermined in the Treaty of Treason, sealed in envelopes long before Katniss was born. This time, the card just happens to say, the tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors. Very solemn, very legal, very convenient. But here's the real question. If this was always the rule, why does it land with such a specific threat? Why does every victor in Panem instantly understand, this isn't fate, this is Snow? That part matters because it tells you what the quarter quell really is. Not a twist, a retcon. Snow is trying to fix the narrative problem Katniss created. She turned a capital fairy tale into a district myth. So he tries to turn her back, make the Mockingjay stop being a symbol of rebellion and become a symbol of capital power again. You won once? Cute. The capital can drag you back whenever it wants. The games don't end when you win. They only end when the capital says, cut. On paper, it's elegant. He doesn't just kill her in an alley. He makes her fight for her life again, on camera, under his rules, so her death proves the system still works. We're going to cover how this is the purest version of the unspoken rule. The capital never loses on screen. Even when someone dies, the regime wins the edit. But there is a lot to uncover here because the move is also suicidal. By reaping only victors, Snow is openly breaking the promise Victor's village was built on: safety, exemption. The fantasy that if your district sacrifices enough children, one golden survivor will be untouchable. Suddenly, the starlets of Capital TV are back in the slaughterhouse. Does that make the games more thrilling? Or just cruel and unfair in a way even Capital viewers can't fully ignore? You can feel the relationship between audience and show start to strain. These aren't anonymous 12-year-olds. These are Finnick, Johanna, Beatty, people the Capital has spent years turning into products. When you throw your own products into the meat grinder, what are you telling the people who bought them? This is where we talk about the arena itself, the clock, the segmented horrors, the jabberjays that weaponize Katniss's loved one's screams. Every hour is tailored to humiliate and psychologically break her. The message is simple. You're not the author of anything. You're still a character the Capital can torture for ratings. And then pattern interrupt. For the first time, the Capital isn't the only one writing. Plutarch's head game maker promotion, District 13's secret plan, BT's wire, those aren't just tactics, they're script edits. The arena stops being a cage and becomes a stage for something the unspoken rule was supposed to prevent entirely. The Capital's first on-screen defeat, hijacking the show, District 13's first broadcast war. And if the arena just became a stage, District 13's next move is to steal the cameras. They don't roll out more bombs first, they roll out BT. The strategy is simple at face value. If the Capital controls the show, you hijack the show. But here's the real question. What happens when a system built entirely on televised control suddenly has to share the screen? This is where we talk about District 13's real weapon. Not the hovercrafts, not the missiles, the propo. They don't just film Katniss for morale posters in one district. They hack straight into Capital feeds, into living rooms that have only ever seen Snow's version of events. You're watching the games, or a victory speech, or another polished reminder of your place. And then it glitches. Static. A cut. And suddenly there's Katniss, covered in dust, yelling that fire is catching. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters more than any single explosion. For the first time since the Dark Days, everyone in Panem is seeing an alternative narrative in real time. Not rumors traded in the seam, not half-burned leaflets, actual footage of bombed districts, mass graves, smoking ruins, all broadcast over the same network that once promised glamour, order, and the illusion that the Capital never really bleeds. Look at the contrast. Capital TV is all smooth tracking shots, perfect lighting, Caesar Flickerman's practiced grin. The games are edited so you never see the broken cameras, the dead peacekeepers, the parts where the victors don't play along. 13's feed? It's handheld, shaky, unpolished. You hear people coughing off-screen, sirens in the background. Katniss stumbles over a line and they keep it in. Why? Because the relationship they're building with the audience is the opposite of Snow's. He sells perfection, they sell proof. And that is existentially threatening. The Capital can survive a lost battle off-screen. It cannot survive millions of people watching its losses live. So it scrambles. We're going to cover the counter moves because they tell you exactly what rule is being broken. First, they cut the feed mid-propo, hard switch to the Capital seal. Then they rush out their own edited footage. Peter, in pristine lighting, pleading with Katniss to stop, framed as the reasonable victor begging terrorists to stand down. They replay him choking on blood, just enough to sell the threat, but never enough to admit their own torture. The question isn't whether 13 is violent. The question is who's allowed to define what that violence means. And here's the pivot on the unspoken rule. It was never just we never lose. It was we are the only ones allowed to define what losing looks like. District 13's hacked broadcasts tear that away. They don't just show the Capitol can be hurt, they show the Capitol can be edited. Once the edit is up for grabs, the games aren't the only thing at risk. The entire story of Panem is Peter on screen, torture, editing, and the illusion of control. So, once the edit is up for grabs, what does the Capitol do? They put a hijacked victor on screen. Peter's broadcasts are the Capitol's nightmare solution to a problem they swore they'd never admit existed. You remember the first one. He looks thin, cleaned up, framed by tasteful Capitol decor. At face value, it's a concerned former tribute urging peace. He asks Katniss to stop the fighting. He repeats Snow's line that more war means more dead children. It almost sounds reasonable. Then the bruises start. Each new appearance, Peter looks worse. Split lip, bruised eye, hands that tremble when he grips the chair. His speech gets ragged, his eyes flick constantly off camera, and the message sharpens into open pleading. You have to stop. You don't know what they're doing to you. Here's the real question. Who is they supposed to be? The Capitol wants every district viewer to fill in that blank with District 13. This is where we talk about intent. Why keep putting a clearly suffering victor on television? The answer is brutal and simple. Peter becomes a human shield and an emotional weapon at the same time. If Katniss keeps fighting, she's causing his pain. If she stops, the rebellion slows. Either way, the Capitol can point to the screen and say, "See, we gave you a victor. You turned him into this." That part matters because it tries to flip the relationship between oppressor and victim without ever admitting the games were the original crime. But watch the edit. There is a lot to uncover here. We never see who's in the room with him. No peacekeepers, no doctors, no Snow. The camera never widens enough to show restraints, doors, or even a shadow that might suggest he's not free to leave. We don't get timestamps, we don't get context for fresh injuries, and we definitely don't get any hint that the Capitol is losing ground anywhere else. So why show the bruises at all? Why risk looking cruel on purpose? Because it still fits the unspoken rule. The Capitol will show its own violence, but only if it can frame that violence as necessary, justified, and most importantly, under control. Peter isn't presented as evidence of their desperation. He's presented as proof of their resolve. The message is, we are willing to do this, calmly, indefinitely. We do not flinch. Snow can't say, we're cornered. So instead he says, we're firm. The torture becomes policy, not panic. And for a while, it works. You, as a viewer in any district, can't prove what's been cut out. You only know what the Capitol chooses to air until they lose him. Because when the rebels finally pull Peter out and start rolling their own footage, the edit breaks in a new direction. For the first time, the Capitol's victim isn't just an image on their screen. He can talk back when the cameras turn around, exposing the Capitol's casualties. He can talk back. And the rebels realize something crucial. If one rescued victor can puncture the Capitol's edit, What happens if the cameras turn around completely? This is where we talk about the moment the war stops being a distant spectacle and starts bleeding into the capital's own living rooms. At face value, District 13's early propo are simple revenge TV. Show starving districts, show burning fields, show why snow has to go. But here's the real question. What has the capital never shown? Not just dissent. Damage. You've never seen a downed hovercraft on official broadcasts, never seen a peacekeeper retreat, never seen a capital citizen running in fear. War, by design, only happens to other people. Back then, during the dark days, the Treaty of Treason set up the games as a permanent reminder that the districts could be crushed again at any time. The relationship on screen is clear. The capital punishes, the districts suffer. So why the change now in Mockingjay? Because once 13 gets control of a signal, they don't just mirror the old pain, they flip it. We're going to cover not only the cruelty aimed at the districts, but the cracks forming in the supposedly untouchable center. Think about Katniss walking through the ruins of District 8's hospital. The cameras follow her down those crowded, broken hallways. You see bandaged stumps, burned faces, the kind of images the games never lingered on because they don't sell the promise of clean, glorious death. Then the hovercrafts arrive. The capital bombs a hospital. On screen, in real time. That part matters because 13 doesn't cut away. They don't sanitize. They replay the footage. They freeze on the moment bombs hit the roof, and they pair Katniss's rage with images of capital tech failing to stay distant and clinical. You're not just told the capital is brutal. You watch it choose a hospital over a weapons depot. That's not a tactical target. That's an admission of fear. And then the edit widens. Suddenly, rebel cameras catch a hovercraft going down in flames. They show shattered marble in the capital, smoke rising where no district citizen was ever supposed to imagine smoke. You glimpse capital citizens shoved into shelters, their perfect hair out of place, their faces confused instead of entertained. Tiny shots, a few seconds each. But the psychological shift is huge. If the capital can lose a ship, what else can it lose? If its streets can crack, can its palaces, if its own children can cry on camera? Is anyone really safe? The unspoken rule that the capital only ever appears as judge, never as victim, starts to erode, not in one grand confession, but in 1,000 small images ricocheting through Panem. Here's the real question. Once people see the capital bleed, what does victory even mean anymore? The war stops being about who holds which district. It becomes a fight over who gets to define defeat on screen. For the first time, the capital isn't just losing troops. It's losing the edit. And Snow knows it, which is why his next move isn't just military, it's narrative triage. The children in the snow, the broadcast the capital couldn't survive. Narrative triage sounds abstract. Then the parachutes fall. You remember the scene, a white, drifting snow of capital relief packs right at the edge of Snow's mansion. Children run toward them. Because why wouldn't they? For their entire lives, parachutes have meant gifts, medicine, the capital's promise that it can always swoop in and save you. The games have trained them to see that shape in the sky and feel hope, not fear. And then the first wave explodes. Tiny bodies, bright fire, a sound that doesn't belong in a liberated city. When the second wave hits, it's worse. Because this is where we talk about Prim. The medics rush in, marked with the same white that's supposed to signal neutrality. They kneel among the wounded children, and the delayed charges go off. One blast for the kids, one blast for the people trying to save them. At face value, it's the perfect capital atrocity. Children as bait, medics as collateral, the exact nightmare the districts have been living for 75 years, now happening on the capital's own doorstep. And Coin knows that. She doesn't just capture it, she weaponizes it. The footage is everywhere. On the giant screens, in the emergency broadcasts, replayed until even the most loyal capital citizen can't unsee it. Here's the real question. Who needed to believe this more? The districts or the capital? The books strongly imply 13 designed those bombs, copied from Maximum Horror, but Coin's choice isn't just to use them, it's to make sure the cameras are rolling and then never let the capital look away. Because for the first time, the people of the capital are watching their own children die in a way they've been carefully taught only happens to district kids. The relationship flips. Suddenly, they're the ones seeing small bodies on screens, hearing panicked screams, wondering if their child could be next. That part matters because the entire regime has been built on a single unspoken rule. The capital is untouchable. The capital protects its own. Once you see capital children massacred, that rule is gone. We're going to cover how the Dark Days and the Treaty of Treason set up this exact hierarchy, but the short version is simple. Violence was always framed as something done to traitors, to rebels, to those distant districts that supposedly deserved it. On camera, the capital was clean, safe, superior. Even during the games, they could pretend it was a controlled environment, a necessary punishment, a spectacle with a victor at the end. But there is a lot to uncover here, because this bombing has no victor, no arena, no justification that fits the old script. The capital can't say, they broke the rules. These children didn't, and the medics certainly didn't. So the moral narrative collapses on live TV. The one thing Snow never allowed, open, undeniable capital vulnerability, fills every screen. And here's the pattern interrupt. The regime doesn't fall because rebels storm the palace first. It falls because for the first time, the story the capital told about itself becomes impossible to believe. Once that broadcast airs, the war for buildings is basically over. The war for belief is already lost. Capital infallibility. Meet Katniss Everdeen. So, if the war for belief is already lost, where does that war actually start? Not with District 13's hacking skills. It starts the moment one girl from District 12 keeps forcing the cameras to show things the capital never planned on airing. This is where we talk about Katniss Everdeen as a walking stress test for capital infallibility. From her very first move, she breaks the script. Volunteering for Prim isn't just emotional, it's visually disruptive. You're supposed to see terrified children dragged on stage, not an older sister sprinting in, screaming. At face value, the capital spins it as heartwarming drama. But here's the real question. Why does Snow immediately start watching her personally after that? Because the games just accidentally broadcast that the reaping can be resisted. Then we get Rue. The rule says tributes are disposable. The edit should move on. Instead, Katniss turns a dead child into a funeral. She sings, decorates the body with flowers, and the cameras cannot cut fast enough. The capital's only option is to frame it as a touching moment before moving to the next kill. But that part matters because in District 11, the same footage becomes a riot. One song, one image, two completely different meanings. The relationship between screen and audience slips out of capital control for the first time. The berries are the next escalation. On paper, it's a romantic gesture to save her star-crossed lover. In practice, it's a live broadcast of a tribute threatening to break the game's core promise. There will be a single, unquestioned victor. The capital scrambles. Seneca is executed off-screen, the rule is bent in real time, and then the spin machine goes into overdrive. Katniss isn't a rebel. She's just confused, in love, harmless. We're going to cover how hard Snow leans on that narrative later, because he knows he cannot let the districts see what actually happened. The game's blinking first. But containment keeps failing. The salute in District 11, the one aimed at Katniss, is supposed to be a quaint district custom. Instead, it becomes a televised symbol of defiance. The quarter-quell force field explosion is framed as a technical glitch. Yet what did people really see? A girl from the seam shooting the sky until the arena itself surrenders. Here's the real question. What is Katniss actually good at? It's not just archery. Her real power is creating images the capital can't fully domesticate. Volunteering, singing, the berries, the salute, the mockingjay propose. Each one means one thing to capital censors and something far more dangerous to every watching district. So if the unspoken rule is that the capital can never lose on camera, then maybe Katniss's true role isn't the girl on fire at all. Maybe she's the girl who makes losing visible. And once losing is visible, what happens to a regime built entirely on the promise that it never ever does? Books versus movies. What we're allowed to see about power. And here's where things get uncomfortable for us as viewers, because when you move from the page to the screen, you're not just watching Panem's propaganda anymore, you're inside another layer of it. In the books, you are stuck in Katniss's head. If Caesar Flickerman is doing a broadcast, you only see the part Katniss is physically present for. If Snow hijacks the airwaves, you hear about it when she does, or you get Haymitch's summary after the fact. At face value, that just feels like standard first-person narration. But here's the real question. Why is our access to information almost as restricted as a random person in District 7? There is a lot to uncover here. Katniss rarely watches a full games broadcast the way a capital citizen would. During the 74th games, she misses commentary, sponsor segments, reaction shots. We only know what she knows. A cannon fires, a hovercraft appears, Claudius Temple-Smith's voice booms overhead. That part matters because it mirrors the way the districts get their news, partial, delayed, translated through someone else's agenda. You're not omniscient. You're trapped in a curated feed. Then the films come in and quietly break that rule. Suddenly, the camera leaves Katniss. We're going to cover the arena, but also Snow's rose-scented study, the Gamemakers control room, a capital living room where a family gasps at a mutt attack. No citizen of Panem ever has that view, only us. Why do we get to see more of the games than the people actually living under them? This is where we talk about visual power. The control room is sleek, glowing, almost holy. With a single command, Snow can zoom in on a tribute, erase a death scream under triumphant music, or cut away the instant a district starts to look sympathetic instead of dangerous. You watch him order the feed changed, and it happens instantly. One man, one sentence, and an entire nation's reality edits itself. Notice how the adaptation doubles down on that. Seneca's death in the book is something Katniss hears about vaguely. In the movie, you're walked into that stark white room. You see the bowl of nightlock, and you understand this is what happens when a producer breaks the unspoken broadcasting rule. Snow's conversations with Crane and later with Plutarch turn media control into explicit strategy sessions. Why the berries must be reframed, why a wedding proposal might calm a district, why the Mockingjay dress is a problem, not a costume. By Mockingjay, the films show you District 13's Propo studio in detail. Green screens, editing bays, Cressida calling for another take. It's propaganda versus propaganda. And here's the real question. If both sides are cutting, scoring, and scripting, who's actually telling you the truth? Because just as the Capitol decides what Panem sees, the filmmakers decide what we see about the Capitol. The relationship between camera and power is the real games here. And once you notice that, you have to wonder, in this story about people being forced to perform for survival, whose performance are we still not seeing yet? What if the rule broke early? Alternate timelines of Panem's TV war. So, if the camera is the real arena, here's the real question. What happens to Panem if the show actually breaks? Not metaphorically, literally fails on air in front of every district and every capital living room. Start with the berries. At face value, Snow has a simple option. Let Katniss and Peter die together. Restore the one victor rule. Problem solved. But imagine that broadcast. The countdown hits 1, the cannon never fires, and instead of a triumphant anthem, you watch the last 2 tributes in the game's history collapse on screen. No victor, no crown, no promise fulfilled. That part matters because the games are a contract. You suffer, the Capitol entertains you, and in the end, someone earns survival. Break that, and every district kid who ever fantasized about winning suddenly sees the truth. There is no way out. Why volunteer if even victory is a lie? In that timeline, the rebellion doesn't simmer. It boils. You don't get slow burn Mockingjay proper. You get riots the second the broadcast cuts. Career districts, trained from birth on the promise of glory, realize their children died for a spectacle that couldn't even stick the landing. The Capitol might respond with mass executions. But notice what they've already lost. The games as a stable ritual. Once the show fails, the relationship between fear and hope snaps, and Snow has to rule on terror alone. Now rewind further, back to the dark days, before the Treaty of Treason, before anyone has heard the phrase Hunger Games. We're going to cover a different kind of what if, an early District 13 leak. Imagine grainy footage of Capitol hovercraft going down, soldiers retreating, fires in their own streets, slipping into district feeds before the system is fully locked. If the districts had seen the Capitol lose in real time, would the original rebellion have actually won? Maybe. There is a lot to uncover here, because the main reason Snow's Panem works is the myth that the Capitol is untouchable. Show them bleeding on camera, and suddenly the Treaty of Treason looks less like law and more like overcompensation. But there's another path. The Capitol sees that leak, panics, and goes full blackout. No national broadcasts. No games ever invented, because televising anything becomes too risky. You don't get a ritualized annual punishment. You get a quieter, more traditional dictatorship, brutal but less theatrical. The irony is that the very tool that cements Snow's power in canon might never exist if the rule of never show weakness is broken too early. Jump forward again. Different arena, different fracture point. This is where we talk about the careers. You're watching a sleek, confident District 2 tribute, raised on capital propaganda, promised honor, suddenly snap on live TV. They look into the camera and say the quiet part out loud, that the games are rigged, that mentors are threatened, that victors vanish after parties in the capital. What does production do? Cut the feed and call it a technical issue, or keep rolling and label it a psychotic break? Either way, the damage is done. If they execute that tribute on air, the career districts see their golden child treated exactly like a rebel from 11. If they spin it as madness, every offhand comment from a mentor, every weird capital rumor suddenly feels more credible. You can imagine parents in 1 and 2 asking for the first time whether sending their children to train for this is still worth it. Then there's the quarter quell. Canonically, the rescue works and the arena explodes into rebel propaganda. But imagine a failed version, exposed in the worst possible way. The force field goes down unevenly, the hovercraft is hit, cameras swing wildly, and for a few raw seconds, every viewer sees the truth. Plutarch Heavensby, head game maker, coordinating with District 13. A capital official turned traitor mid-games. Does Snow cancel the games live, cut to black, and announce an emergency security situation? Does he execute Plutarch on air to prove control? Or does he pretend it was all part of a twisted twist, rebranding open treason as scripted entertainment? None of those options are clean. Cancel the games live, and you admit they're vulnerable. Kill your own game maker on camera, and you admit people inside the system are rebelling. Call it a twist, and you train your audience to question what's real. The unspoken rule, never let the broadcast show the capital losing control, isn't a small production note. It's the load-bearing wall. Once the feed becomes unpredictable, every future announcement, every anthem, every victor's interview carries a new question: is this actually power, or are we watching it fall apart in real time? And here's the quiet horror. The moment people start asking that, the games stop being a warning and start being an instruction manual. The real rule of Panem: never let them see you bleed. So when the games stop being a warning and start being an instruction manual, what rule are people actually learning? It isn't in the Treaty of Treason. It's not in any speech Snow gives. But it runs under everything. The real rule of Panem is simple. The capital can do anything. Kill, lie, torture. As long as it never lets you see it lose or admit it was wrong. That's the one line even Snow is afraid to cross. You can watch your district's children die on the screen. You will never be allowed to watch the capital bleed. Back in the dark days, the capital almost did bleed on camera. The war dragged into the streets, into the sky, into the supply lines. So the Treaty of Treason doesn't just end the fighting, it rewrites it. At face value, the games are punishment and prevention. In practice, they're a reset of the story, from we nearly lost to we were always in control. That part matters because once you've sold that version, you can never publicly walk it back. So we're going to cover how every tool we've talked about is really about protecting that illusion. Snow's early media experiments, they test how much horror people will accept as long as the capital's victory looks clean. The polished arena broadcasts, the anthem, the hovercrafts sweeping in at the exact right moment, those are all stage directions for invincibility. No glitches, no hesitation, no doubt. And then you get the berries, Two kids from the same district refusing to play. On paper, it's a minor rules issue. On screen, it's a disaster. If they both die, the capital looks petty and outmaneuvered. If they both live, the capital looks forced to compromise. Here's the real question. Which version makes them bleed less in public? Seneca chooses the double victor, and in doing so, he snaps the unspoken law. The games admit they can be beaten. From there, everything is a battle over visibility. District 13 doesn't just bomb, it broadcasts. Katniss doesn't just rebel, she becomes footage. Children in the capital die in that final bombing, but the camera is pointed at Snow's roses, Coin's podium, the smoke. Whose suffering counts? Whose doesn't? This is where we talk about how dictatorships don't just rule with guns, they rule with stories. Because once people see their rulers bleed, once they see a peacekeeper run, or Snow cough blood onto white roses, the promise of inevitability breaks. The regime might still have weapons, but the narrative is already dying. And here's where it starts to feel uncomfortably close to home. Which institutions in our world work very hard to never apologize on camera, never show internal conflict, never admit defeat? What does that tell us about the relationship between their power and their image? There is a lot to uncover here, and in the next section, we're going to push that question one step further. If the story is the real weapon, who gets to decide how Panem's story ends? Rolling credits, your turn to break the narrative. If the story is the real weapon, then we've spent this whole video tracking the moment the capital started to lose its grip on the trigger. We went from that hidden law of capital infallibility all the way through the berries, the quarter quell, District 13's pirate broadcasts, and finally to the bombing that turned a victory parade into a war crime on live TV. At face value, those are just plot beats. Here's the real question. What do they all have in common about what Panem is and isn't allowed to see? Think back to where we started. The Treaty of Treason writes down the games, the punishments, the district's place. But the one rule even the capital was afraid to break never shows up on paper. It lives in the cameras. Never let Panem see the capital lose. Not in the arena, not in the streets, not in a hospital full of children. That part matters because once you notice it, you can't unsee how every mistake in the story is really a broadcast failure. The berries are the first crack. On screen, you watch a District 12 girl and boy turn the game's final choice into a hostage situation for the entire regime. The capital wins by stopping them, but the image that sticks is that they were willing to die on their own terms. Then the quarter quell tries to fix it by dragging the victors back, and instead it exposes the scam. Victor's village, the promise of safety, the whole relationship between winning and survival, gone in one announcement. District 13's Propos War is the next escalation. Suddenly, Snow doesn't own the frame anymore. You see bombed districts, you see Katniss calling him out, you see capital lies answered in real time. And then the final bombing at the city circle pushes the rule past its breaking point. The capital doesn't just lose a battle, it loses the moral high ground it kept insisting it had, and it does it with every camera rolling. So here's where we talk about you. Which moment do you think breaks the rule most clearly? Is it the double victory from the same district, Rue's flowers and the salute Cinna's dress turning into a mockingjay, or some smaller, easily missed shot where the capital's mask slips for a second? There is a lot to uncover here in the details. If you want more deep dives into Panem's weird little systems And the stories that keep them running, those shares, those comments, those subscriptions, are the fuel that tells me this is a world you still have questions about. Because the next step is obvious, right? If the Capitol had a rule about never showing weakness, what were District 13's rules for truth on camera? And after Snow, when Coin is gone and the games are over, who decides what Panem is allowed to see? In any system, the most important laws are usually the ones no one is allowed to say out loud. We've talked about the Capitol's rule. Now the question is, whose story do you want to break open next?